Thank you, trustees, for attending this special call meeting. I appreciate the short notice and that you were all able to make it. At this point, I'm calling the special call meeting to order, and I will turn it over to Dr. Royster.
Thank you very much, Ms. Venus Wells, and I would echo your sentiments. I appreciate you all responding with unanimity and being able to be a part of this today. What compels us to be here today is we made a commitment in the structuring of our plans that we would allow the public preferably 2 weeks notice, but certainly we committed to 5 calendar days of notice before we changed any plan. As you all know, and you all approved, our plan is aligned to the DHEC frameworks. It's constructed that way initially. As you recall, it aligns between DHEC's rating of high, medium, and low as far as spread. Now, when we developed this framework, there were several things we knew and there were several things we didn't know. One thing we knew when we developed the framework, that we were in a period of increasing spread as defined by DHEC. In fact, when the framework was developed, we were between 400 and 500 per 100,000 cases. When we announced it to the public, we were right at 500. I believe we're at 533. Now, although we are still rated at a high level by DHEC, the numbers are not as high as they were when we designed the plan. And I also mentioned to you there were things we did not know. What we did not know at that point, because we'd had no opportunity to know this, not having students in school, we did not know how well students, parents would adapt to and comply with the protocols in place. We did not know how well or how easily or how difficult it might be for our employees to not only follow the protocols they had in place, but to ensure that our students were following the protocols. Because it's a very different environment for employees and for students as well. All based on those 4 tenets of what public health and medical professionals tell us are the keys to combating this virus. And that is frequently washing or sanitizing your hands, wearing a mask, maintaining 6 feet of social distancing, and not being at work or at school if you don't feel well. One thing before we leave that, probably a good reminder, I don't think everybody always catches the nuance of wearing a mask. Wearing a mask in accord with public health information that we've received from DHEC does not alleviate your responsibility or need to stay 6 feet away from other people, because the current DHEC guidance that has been in place since we designed this is whether you have a mask on or not, if you have been within 6 feet of proximity, inside 6 feet, with a person who is infected or tested or test positive, and you've been inside that 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, you're required to quarantine. So simply the fact that you had on a mask, if you stayed inside that 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, would cause you to have to quarantine. And quarantine is 14 days from the period of last contact when that contact was 15 minutes or more. Which presents a concern not only for the health and safety of our employees, our students, but it also presents a concern about our ability notwithstanding the consideration to their health, to be able to staff our classrooms. So the 6 feet, in accord with the public health information that we've received from the state's public health agency, 6 feet is key, and that drives a lot of what we do. We've now had 3 full weeks of school in addition to the leap week. You all recall the leap week was for students at the elementary and middle school level. We were required to offer it. It was required to be in person, but students were not required or compelled to attend. So at the elementary level and the middle school level, they had the leap week and 3 more weeks to carry out the protocols we have in place. At the high school level, at 3 weeks. We started with a 1, so with 1/4 of our brick and mortar students in attendance. We realized that we could move very quickly from a 1 to a 2. Now, at the time we did that, we moved into a medium spread in the district, in the county. But we moved quickly to a 2 because of how well the 1 had gone. It went well because our students, our parents, and our employees did what they were asked to do. And they did it with great fidelity. It went very well. We believe that success, which is reflected in our numbers, and I'll share with you in just a minute the most up-to-date numbers of individuals we have in isolation and quarantine, in addition to our own contact tracing. We believe that that's a reason that our rate related to school has stayed extremely low. And it's remained stable during all those phases of attendance. So we're now at the point that we request that this body approve flexibility for the administration to consider additional factors in determining which attendance plan we operate under. Within a DHEC designation of high. This would enable us to continue to remain under a Plan 2, which the administration, as well as the experts with which we consult, believe is safe under current conditions. Because I would remind you, the protocols for a 1 and a 2 are exactly the same. Going back to those tenets we talked about earlier. Maintaining 6 feet of social distancing, wearing a mask in transitions, and at other times when they might not be able to maintain 6 feet, frequently washing or sanitizing hands, having people stay home when they don't feel well. There is absolutely no protocol difference between a 1 and a 2. The difference is the number of students that our employees have responsibility for ensuring they follow the protocols. And they have demonstrated, both our students and our employees, a great ability to follow those protocols. And one of the reasons to start with a 1 was to ensure that students could become accustomed, employees could become accustomed, and the protocols would be followed with rigor and fidelity. The other factors that we would look at are the factors that we look at now, in addition to just the DHEC spread. We want to provide added weight to the 2-week new incidence rate. You know, that rating has 3 categories that we get from DHEC. You see them up there. New confirmed cases, positive cases, the 2-week incident rate, the 2-week trend, and the 2-week positive test. So the positive test right now is greatly driving the overall statistic. I believe one reason that may be is the overall number of tests in the last several weeks have declined. We theorize that that's the result of people either adopting on their own or it's being recommended to them. They don't go get tested unless they feel like they have some symptoms. So if you feel like you have symptoms, you'll get tested. I think there's a good likelihood that you're going to test positive. I think that's borne out in the numbers. What we want to give a little extra weight to and looking at is the rate per 100,000. And you see there our rate per 100,000. Can you scroll that up where we can see the last number? Okay. While he's moving to that, is the rate as of the 13th of September was 9.9%. Preceding week, you see, was 12.5. And you see 97 cases versus 151 the week before, and the number below that is 64, and the number below that is 79. So we want to look at that, not just as a part of the whole DHEC evaluation or metric, but in isolation and giving a little additional consideration to it. And again, considering the percent of positive test rate as a part of the 100,000, which is not up there as a column. In other words, us looking at that. Student and employee adherence to the protocols. Again, we've had great response. That has worked tremendously well. We'll continue to look at that. And as we do now on a daily basis, look at the level of spread within schools. Now, right now, the most recent numbers that we have 73 employees who are out of work, either quarantined or exposed. Only 9 had an exposure at work. And in almost every one of those cases, it was unavoidable. They were dealing with a student in a particular situation, and they were inside that 15-minute window. We have 289 students who are either isolating or quarantining. As a reminder, isolating, you've tested positive. You've been diagnosed as having COVID-19. 34 are isolating. 255 are quarantining. So if you put that in perspective, those are very good numbers. Obviously, we don't want anybody to be sick. We don't want anybody to be exposed. But the exposures we are seeing are almost all, not all, but almost all from outside the work setting, the school setting. And the majority of people we have excluded are for exposure. They're quarantined. They're not isolated. We closely monitor isolation and quarantine data on a school-by-school basis. That number of employees has been consistent at about 60 since school started. It's been consistently around that number. Now, we track all of them, so this could include, some of those students might include students in the virtual program that their parents have notified us. We believe that we can assure our employees and our students and our families with the same degree of safety in a 2 that we have in a 1, based on our now multiple week experience with implementing protocols. I believe it's important, as I know all of you do, to have students physically present at school as frequently as they can be present. Safely present. Safely for them and safely for our employees. And as you all are well aware, there's a lot of information out there as to the severity of this. There is information that it is much less severe for younger people. There is also great risk greater risk for employees because of their age. And in some cases, underlying medical conditions, which some experts estimated well more than half of our population as a whole has underlying medical conditions. It is a particularly sobering note that we mourn the loss of 3 school district employees in the state of South Carolina within the last 2 weeks. That is even more reason for us to ensure that we move forward in a cautious manner. And we will never recommend to you, nor will we act in a way that does not place the safety and health of our employees and our students foremost in our considerations. We believe that at this point, this is the right thing to do. It maintains those protocols. It maintains the safety that we need to have for employees, for students, and ultimately for our community. Because if we have a large number of students present, and we have spread because we don't follow the protocols, that spread will not stop at the door of the school. That spread will follow them out into the community. I would also note, as we're talking about this, you all will recall from our plan, we have always had exceptions to the plan with individuals or small groups of students. One of the things that we continue to look at and work towards is increasing the number of days where we can do that and maintain the parameters we talked about, most especially maintain the 6 feet of social distancing. We currently have groups within the system looking at the possibility of returning, and I mentioned this to you all before, but as a reminder, of returning pre-K, K1, and possibly 2, second grade, to in-person 4 to 5 days a week if we can design a way in which to do that safely. The class sizes do not yet lend themselves to just decreeing that and doing it. There would have to be some modifications made, some changes made. For example, at pre-K and kindergarten, there'd be times of the day that would be with an aide and not with the teacher. We have a pilot group of 9 elementary principals looking at that right now. How we might safely do that to ensure the safety of those students, the teacher, the aide, and the greater school community. We're also looking at return to a greater frequency, 4 to 5 days, of some of our special education students. As you all know, we already have special ed students at Washington Center and West Greenville attending more than 2 days a week. We're looking at that. We have a group looking at that internally with special needs, and we also have a group looking at the return of career and technical students at the career centers, beginning with the level 2 students. Because of the small class size and the ability to hold the class within the shop areas, we only have a handful of classes that we're having to adapt logistically to try to bring them back because they don't have the social distancing space. So as we've talked about before, perhaps not as directly specifically as that, we are working on those things and should be able to make some announcements about that within the next 10 days or so. Again, making certain that we do that in the manner that ensures the safety for all. Now, again, that's not something we're asking you to act upon or approve today, because that's in accord with the exceptions we list in our plan already. What we're simply asking you to do today is to amend the attendance plan framework to allow the administration flexibility to utilize attendance plan 0, 1, or 2 within the DHEC overall designation of high. That's all that we request that you do. Would still leave us the ability at medium to be in a 1 or a 2, and at low to be in a 2 or a 5, assuming the appropriate health protocols are in place. I'd be glad, Mrs. LaVentis-Wells, to answer any questions that board members might have, or anything that I might have inadvertently omitted that you need to know in order to make that decision.
So I have a recommended motion from the administration to amend the attendance plan framework to allow the administration flexibility to utilize attendance plan 0, 1, or 2 with the DHEC designation of high. And Mr. Sailors?
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make that motion.
Second.
And Ms. Wells seconded. Are there questions? Any questions? I have a question then. Basically, what I'm hearing you say, Dr. Royster, is that DHEC regulations are calling for the social distancing. That's what is being required of us. Is that correct?
DHEC has not put that in regulation, but it is in their recommendation. In their recommendation, absent direction from any other public health entity, of which there is no other in our state. They are the state agency responsible for public health. And they have said to us the things that we have said to you. And that is 6 feet of social distancing, wearing a mask, frequently sanitizing your hands, staying at home if you are ill.
I also heard you say that you're looking at ways to increase the days of the week for students to re-enter into a basically traditional schedule.
Yes, ma'am. As we have been doing since we began this process, we are just now further along with that. For one thing, we had to make sure that what we put in place to protect people was in fact working the way it was intended to work. And I believe all the data supports that it is.
And you're looking to implement elementary special needs, special education students first in order to see how things progress?
I'm taking it that you had a comma in there, elementary, comma, special needs. You weren't defining just special needs at the elementary level.
No.
So I took it the right way then. Yes, elementary, special needs, pre-K through high school, career center year 2, which would be predominantly seniors in high school.
You're looking to proceed to 4 or 5 days.
Yes. Ideally 5.
Okay.
There are some specifics related to special education that we need to continue to discuss, where they have a requirement for inclusion.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, we won't have general ed students there on Friday, so we need to work through that, but I do not see there being an issue with having them there 5 days a week. They just would not be able to have that inclusion on Friday.
Okay. And,
Up to you.
okay, and also just want to make sure that I'm understanding that by the step-by-step progression, this assists food services, buses, and so forth to adapt to all of these changes and implications or implementing it.
Yeah, I appreciate your question or your comment, because it really points out this is not simply a matter of opening the door and we've measured the room and they'll fit in there socially distanced. That's a part of it. In fact, it's a part to the level of we've sent someone from facilities out to all of our elementary schools to physically lay out each classroom at those levels that we're looking at, pre-K, K1. We're also looking at 2, more questionable at 2, to lay that out to see how many we can safely put in there. So they have to physically go out and touch those spaces, not just looking at the drawings, which they have digitally, because the drawings don't always reveal what was actually as built. But you also have to take into account our transportation people have to look at that. Can they handle additional transportation on those days and stay within the requirement from the state that transportation not exceed 67% of the bus capacity, which in some cases requires a second route. So they have to plan for that. Food service has to, as you noted, has to plan for having additional students in the building. One of the struggles we have, we talked about it related to if employees have to isolate or quarantine. Right now, we are down more than 50 food service employees because of vacancies. Now, that includes some number of quarantine or isolated food service employees, but it's in excess of 50 that we don't have at work, and the majority of that are unfilled positions. We are short 70 bus drivers. We would have a huge issue right now if this were a regular year. In fact, we would likely be coming back to you to ask for some things that would incentivize folks to sign up to drive. We're having a great challenge with that, but they've been able to operate the buses. They've operated on time, but again, they're running reduced loads because of the schedule we're operating. So they have to be able to calculate out, can they run these increased schedules? So all these things are happening both independently, but simultaneous with other work. And they're coming back to us and saying, here's our finding here, here's our finding here. Then we critique that and say, well, have we looked at doing this? Have we looked at doing that? So it's a process to make sure that we don't step off into something we cannot do. And cannot do, most importantly, cannot do safely. Because we're not going to recommend anything to you nor act in a way that does not hold in its highest regard the safety of our students and our employees.
And one thing that is constantly I'm hearing is those teachers and students that chose virtual meant they did not want to be in the schools. And those teachers that chose traditional and students want to be at school. And so, and I would take it that we want them to be in school as well. It's just we are looking at on buses, we're looking at the guidelines that we're held accountable when placing those students 67% capacity. Is that correct?
And I'd look at it perhaps a little bit differently. We all want students to be in school 5 days a week. That's what's best for students. And parents who chose virtual, they chose that they really made a choice that they might not be physically present in school all year. They would be virtual all year. But the other thing to remember is those who didn't choose that, who either chose or because of other issues were compelled to choose to be in person, they made that choice inside a plan that said, these are the things we would do to ensure your safety when you're in person. So I think there are numbers. In fact, I know there are numbers within that wish to do 5 days without regard, that's what they would choose or wish to do. There are others that made that choice knowing certain safety protocols were in place. And equally important is our employees took on this year's responsibilities and agreed to carry them out, knowing here's our plan and here are the protocols we have in place for your safety. So while it is true they did choose that, they chose it with some parameters in place. Parameters we believe are important to the health and safety of everyone.
Were those parameters in place when they were making that choice?
They made the choice between virtual and between in person. We first announced that to the public, I believe it was on July the 21st. And we allowed people to choose virtual really up until the end of the second week of school.
Okay.
Set a couple of deadlines, but we allowed people to continue to shift over up until the second week of school. And we allow people to go back the other way through the end of the first week of school. But we had to stop that at a point, because if we did not stop that at some point, then we could not calculate, can we safely bring back pre-K, kindergarten, first or second grade? Because we got to have a stable number to decide we can have this many in this room with this teacher and keep them 6 feet from each other and 6 feet from the teacher. And also trying to establish an environment where it's not the teacher having to sit like this all day, every day to keep the 6 feet. Some range of motion to move from here to the Promethean board to back and forth and to come in and out of the room. So it's more than just laying out so many square feet inside a box. There has to be some ability to move there and to keep them from being in that proximity, whether they wear a mask or not, for more than 15 minutes. And I think it's somewhat of a nuance, but it's not subtle. The DHEC has straight out said to us, you got somebody inside that 15 minutes, whether they're wearing a mask or not, when somebody's positive, they are to quarantine.
All right, and then my last is, what are we doing to better, I don't know how to say this. I feel like the e-learning is an obstacle for many during this process, and not only for students, but for teachers. And I'm trying to find out how we're going to make this e-learning better, much better than what we're dealing with now.
Right. I would answer your question and separate it out to make sure, because I know you know what you're talking about, I know what you're talking about, but other people listening may not distinguish between e-learning and virtual. Virtual is what we talked about earlier. You go that 100% of the time. It's highly structured because there's a teacher assigned to that. They have more students than the ones in person, but there's a teacher assigned to that, and that's what they do.
Right.
Either all day at the elementary, middle school level, or by period at the high school level. We have very few concerns or complaints about the virtual school program. We have concerns, both that we hear from parents and students, and concerns that we have about e-learning. Because when you think about that, we're asking those classroom teachers to teach two ways: to teach the ones in front of them, and to teach those that are not able to be in front of them the 3 days they're not there. We have some teachers that have done a great job with that. They're more adept with technology. I've been in rooms where there's a teacher teaching a group sitting there live. They're live streaming video to ones sitting at home, watching them at home, and they're recording it. Every teacher's not yet at that level. That's really, we're asking them to do two jobs in one, so to speak. Now, what we have done within the last week, we have established a more structured framework, and I'll send you that. Mr. McCoy and his staff have worked with the principals on developing a more structured framework for the expectations of a teacher in e-learning. Now, I think we'll address some of those issues. We also are going to pull some of our virtual teachers for some very short periods to have them work with our academic specialists to develop some resources, because this is the environment they work in every day, to develop some resources that can then be adapted and used by our regular classroom teachers beyond the first 9 weeks, which we have it out there for them for the first 9 weeks. They have to add to it, but we have a framework out there for them. Those are the two big things we're doing, and we spent considerable time within the last week on working on structural improvements to increase and improve the quality and fidelity of what we're doing with e-learning.
So these students that are taking AP traditional classroom that are having to teach themselves through e-learning and not scoring high enough on their weekly tests, which has become an insult to their intelligence since they've been doing very well all along. Are we holding them accountable to these grades that they're receiving due to them having to teach themselves during e-learning?
We should not have students teaching themselves. So I need to know what particular student you're talking about or what particular teacher you're talking about. And I'm sure if after we conclude this meeting, you'll let me know that.
Be glad to. And
So one thing I would say, what we're doing is a much improved version of what we did last year at the conclusion of last school year. And that would have been the time when we concluded last school year as far as in person and we shifted to e-learning. That was the critical period just before the AP exams, and our student success on AP exams improved last year. So, but any individual concerns like that, we need to know where they are so they can be addressed.
okay.
A lot of our AP classes, I believe, Jeff, we have teachers that are teaching them in a dual manner, and you may want to speak directly to that.
In some cases, yes. To the height, if it's a single AP class, a singleton, like some of our schools that have AP certificates and all that. And in many cases, those classes, APs are streaming that content because there's no other way to work it out virtually because it was a singleton class. The ones that may be more popular AP classes, AP Human Geography and those types of things, they may be more traditional, in person on the days of attendance and then e-learning on the off days.
That's what I'm talking about. Geography.
Probably on the off. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very difficult for younger students to adapt to that.
Ninth grade. Jeff, you'll let us know who that, again, to Dr. Roy's point, if you let us know who that is, when we can always, as those issues come up, we work with the principal and the teachers to identify that and how to make that a better experience.
I'd like for you just to talk for just a minute on when they're in the 2-day a week, the teacher has to do what for those students, those 2 days, and then when the students are not in the classroom, they're e-learning. So they're having to catch up on other days of material. So explain that so that the public understands.
It should work two ways. There's two options that teachers have, and it depends on the teachers, however they choose to structure their classroom. So one would be the flipped classroom model we've talked about before, where teachers may front load on their e-learning day. They may front load content. So that might be videos the students would watch about a concept that they're learning about. And then that next day in class, the teachers would structure activities that would actually incorporate what the students would have learned. And that allows the teacher to, through those activities, can't do as much group activities now because of this social distancing, but through activities that allows that teacher to figure out what students may have struggled learning the content the day before. And then that allows him to do small group activities or individual work with those students on those low attendance days. The other side of that would be, or in a more traditional setting, the teacher, while they're teaching that face-to-face class, those students would be working on content on the e-learning at home. And again, that should incorporate things like videos that the teachers pre-recorded for whether it be the live instruction she recorded for the class that day, or he or she could do pre-recorded videos, which many of our teachers are doing as well. So they're getting the same instruction, so to speak, but it's video versus live instruction on those days kids are in attendance versus on e-learning.
And at this point, Dr. Worcester, thank you for the explanation on all of those questions. Thank you. Ms. Wells, and then Mr. Lewis, and then Mr. Sailors.
Thank you. I am very pleased to be able to support this motion because I did not want to see us move backward. And particularly, as you noted, and as we discussed in our last meeting, the concern with using a % positive test when there's so much fluctuation in the number of tests that are given and the reasons they're given. If you got a bunch of college students that are going back to school and they need to get tested with no symptoms, versus at the beginning when you only could get a test if you had symptoms and a doctor ordered it. So I'm appreciative of this. I think what I heard you say, and I want to confirm, in the next 10 days or in 10 days, we could expect to hear from you on the potential, what the preparations look like to get our youngest kids back in school 5 days a week?
Yes, that's correct.
go ahead and accelerate for special ed, for CTE, for those groups of students, getting them back in prior to that 10 days, 5 days a week, if the logistics are working out for that.
To maybe answer your question a little different way, but I think this is what you were asking. It would not require us to come back to the board and ask
Right.
for authority to do so. Within our plan, we have the notation that even if you go back to the original approval you all did during the summer of this, there's a notation with that approval that does not restrict us from bringing back individuals or groups to attend in larger days, greater number of days than the plan for the whole district. So
Okay.
no, you're correct.
So then similarly, can I translate that to mean that there might be certain schools that, because of the size of the school and the size of the classroom, based on the number of teachers allocated or the size in general, that those schools might be able to start this sooner in terms of going back to 5 days?
The only way that we might consider doing something like that because of the equity issue would be if we felt like we needed to pilot it somewhere,
Okay.
but we were also assured that space-wise we could do it other places. For example, later this week, we will meet back with those 9 principals. They may propose, in fact, I know what a couple of them are going to propose. Well, here's how I'm going to do it in my school because they've already shared that with me. We might take a few of those and maybe take a Friday and let them do that at their school. So how does that work? You know, they come your Monday, Wednesday, your Tuesday, Thursday, but on Friday at that school, you might bring in this grade level. Let's see how that works. But we don't want, I believe we would create a huge equity issue because we do have a few schools that have a lot more room than others. We do have some varying class sizes, but we do not have class size variance to such a degree that we can get every student in the room, keep 6 feet. Now, we do have vacant rooms. You start putting students in vacant rooms, you have to have personnel to go with them. There's an issue with that. There is both an availability issue and a cost issue. And the bigger issue is the availability. There is not, as you all, I know, readily know, there's not a surplus of quality teacher candidates out there. We've been very fortunate. In fact, I think when we get the final numbers, our retention rate this year is going to be very good as far as retaining teachers. But what we found, because this year we've hired teachers later than we usually do, because we intentionally held off on hiring because we didn't know how many students we'd have in virtual. And we wanted to try to hire teachers maybe more attuned to a virtual environment. So we were hiring a little bit later than we ordinarily hire in a little bit larger number. And the pool of applicants for jobs where traditionally the pool is bigger, primary and elementary, the number of applicants was greatly reduced. So we know there's not a pool of quality candidates out there. Or there are some, but there's not enough to go wholesale and hire. If we had to hire one more 4th grade teacher at every elementary school, we would not find 51 4th grade quality teachers at this point.
Okay, well, you sort of providing some information for the other question I was going to ask, because to Ms. Leventis Wells' questions on the e-learning, what I have heard is that it's difficult, particularly in those younger grades, when students need to be learning independently. Not that they're learning the content, not that they don't have content, but that it's
Right.
difficult if that content's not being delivered by someone or they don't have a person checking in with them, particularly if they're sitting in a daycare setting. So I guess the question was going to be, could we hire teachers or aides to help mitigate some of that lack of connection on those e-learning days for students, particularly if we believe this is going to be a thing where we're going to continue through this first semester with the 2-day-a-week e-learning?
Right now, that's a question that I would defer the answer to later, because I think at this point, what we would want to do if we had access to additional resources, and by access, I don't simply mean the ability to pay for it, because I'm sure we could come back to you all and We could use some of that CARES Act fund. It remains. There's a little bit there, and there's fund balance. But I think the issue would be finding quality personnel. I think that right now our focus needs to be, if we needed to hire 2 or 3 to facilitate getting students back in 5 days a week at the lowest grade levels. That's why we picked the levels we picked. That's where it's most critical for in-person instruction. It's important across the board.
Right.
Most critical where they're learning to read, to write. Kindergarten, by its number itself, class size number, that wouldn't be a place to start. It'd be easier to start somewhere else, but that's a more critical. If we had to choose between kindergarten and 3rd grade, kindergarten more critical. So in some of these schools, for example, we may have a school where they have some empty rooms in proximity, or they can arrange it where there's an empty room directly across from the kindergarten, and an existing aide might take 6 or 8 students over there, and then they shift them back and forth. Because you don't want them mingled with other students. That's another, we don't really talk that much about that, but essential at the elementary level, because we can do it there with the greatest fidelity. You want to keep students together. So if you have exposures, you're limiting the number that are impacted by, now they're not sitting at home 3 days a week, they're sitting at home for 14 straight days. So we want to minimize that. Well, if it came down to we needed to hire a few more aides to make that work across the board, that's, I believe, now where we would get the most for investing that money, but more importantly, for using up whatever quality resource, personnel resource that we have. And we, to a degree, will struggle to fill aide jobs as well. I think we've seen that, as I mentioned earlier, about the bus drivers and the food service workers.
Well, and I believe if we probably have some people in the community that care enough about this, that I think we could start asking them to step up. And I believe we'd see some of them step up to help with those. So that's my belief and my hope. So then the only other question I'm going to ask is, you mentioned transportation. And so in thinking about that, because that would be a limitation if we got to meet that 67%, and then you're looking, we talked at the beginning of the year, you're looking at 2 bus routes, which is 3 hours, maybe less since we don't have as many students. But as part of that, are we going to communicate with parents to find out, families to find out if they might opt out of transportation? I talked with a number of families who said, hey, if the buses are the issue, I'll carpool and coordinate, and I'll bring as many kids to school as I can on my own, with masks, of course. So are we going to get that feedback in case if we see that as becoming a limiting factor, are we going to get feedback from the community and ask them for help in that way?
Yes, to the way you ended your question. We'd do that if we saw a need to do it. Right now, to your point, for one, we got 30% of our population in virtual across the board. Now, some schools, higher percent, we got some schools at 40%. Got 30% of the population in virtual. So that drops us obviously to 70% of our normal population. We're transporting only 50% of that 70%, 50% of what we'd normally transport. Okay. Yeah. But even within that, our students riding the bus has dropped below 50% of what you would forecast 50% to be based on last year's ridership. So that number's already down. Our buses are arriving on time. Now, we had a time change that's greatly helped that. They're arriving everywhere on time, absent of unusual breakdown traffic problem. And they're getting home earlier than they have ever gotten home before, including the traditional longest routes of Magnet and the deaf and blind shuttle bus. In fact, the Magnets, I believe, are getting home 20 minutes till 6, and they've never gotten back that early.
But that's all related to the number of stops they're making primarily, right?
Sorry?
I mean, that's related to the number of stops that they're making because they're not running a full route.
A great deal of that.
Right.
That is. So we know we've got some capacity there. And based on them looking at this, just from a preliminary basis, at the grade levels we're talking about, they believe that we would not appreciably start routes earlier than they're regularly scheduled and would get the elementaries on time, but it might impact the secondary routes. But that's just a first look.
Okay. Okay. And then you did say to be sure that our teachers are getting the help they need on the e-learning side. You did say that y'all are working with your virtual to provide a little more support, because our teachers are stressed out. This is difficult for them with their families. And I think they don't feel like they're delivering what they need to deliver to their students, a lot of them, because they are perfectionists and they want to give the students the best quality. So we're getting them some more resources to help with the e-learning side of that.
Well, and there we run into that same problem, the availability of external resources, like people we could bring in. There just aren't people out there we could bring in. So what we're going to do, and we'll have to ask parents to bear with us on this a little bit, because it will involve some early release for our virtual teachers, maybe a couple of times, as well as them spending an in-service day, to let them craft some things that can be used, not just in virtual, but really be crafted so they can be used in e-learning. And that will take place in the next several weeks. That's the best resource we have. We made a decision to do our development internally and to operate our system internally. I believe that has been a very good decision based on what we have seen happen in districts both large and small, where they have gone externally for resources and have had numerous difficulties, including the crashing of those resources. So it's more personnel intensive, but I believe that's why we've been able to deliver a much stronger, more robust product for a virtual program. And I think it offers us the same opportunity to try to help support the e-learning. But that is the greatest challenge. Another great challenge that our teachers have, we have spent 10 years moving to a more engaging, different model of instruction. Yeah. And this does not lend itself to that. All these requirements and parameters cause you to be the person standing up in front of the room delivering a directed lesson. Now, they've done a great job finding innovative ways to get around that, but trying to innovate your way around something that's there, a barrier you didn't put there. It's not there because you don't want to do it differently. It's there because you can't do it differently. So that adds to that stress as well. Our teachers have done an incredible job. When you go around and see them, you actually go in the classroom and you see what they're doing. They've done an incredible job balancing. I got this group in front of me. I got this group at home.
Well, I appreciate it. I know that we're constantly evaluating like you guys always have. And I don't know that the community recognizes how hard the district is working to find all the ways they can to get students back in the classroom as much as possible. So thank you for that. And I look forward to supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. At this time, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Royster, just a couple of questions. So the action that you're asking us to approve today is specifically to allow us to maintain a level 2, even though the conditions that we've approved in the past would have put us at 1 day a week or 0 days a week.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
The conversation about 5 days a week for the 4K, 5K, first, possibly second grade students, the special ed students and the career center students, you believe that action is already in the plan that we've already approved, so the board doesn't have to approve that?
Yes, sir. It requires no separate approval.
And so it would be your understanding that we could move to that model without the board taking a separate action?
Yes, sir.
We could go ahead and do that.
Yes, sir.
And you expect in the next 10 days to have kind of those plans fully fleshed out?
To be able to roll out a timeline, maybe have done some actual implementation within that 10 days. The one that's probably will be the one that you would see first would be the multiple days of attendance for Career Center Level 2 students.
Okay.
Because quite honestly, it's the easiest one to facilitate logistically.
Okay. Having kids go back to school on Fridays would require us to reopen the buildings. Is that
Yes.
So would you envision that if we move to that we would also then be having teachers be able to come back on Fridays that are currently now working from home?
Yes. Now that would predominantly be the 51 elementary schools.
Okay. So once the elementary schools are back to 5 days,
If we move grade levels within a school, even if it's just one, then we got to run HVAC systems
okay.
to have those students there. And as you know, right now, we're not doing that as part of effort to conserve resources because we know that we have not yet seen the financial impact of the shutdown our state's experienced.
I know that the plans aren't fully fleshed out yet, but are you envisioning that a first grade class is going to go back to school and all of those students are going to be in the same classroom? Or are you envisioning models where these kids are going to be spread out around the building? Are they?
If I answer specifically your question, I would say in the first grade,
Okay.
we would expect them, for the most part. I don't think there'd be a situation where they're not in the same room.
Okay.
Because of first grade class size.
Okay.
I think in all other grades, though, Mr. Lewis, you might expect that they would not be in the same room all day, and there'd be some amount of time that they were in another room, maybe with an aide, and that's going to vary from school to school. It'll look differently from school to school. One of the things the principals talked about is because this is so different from what our youngest students normally do, you probably see them outside more frequently. They'll probably have more frequent recess than they ordinarily would have in a typical school day. So it will look different, but at the same time, keeping them apart and separate from other students so as not to create a situation where one student causes the quarantine of a student in a different class or a different grade level.
The idea of getting, I agree with Ms. Wells, the idea of getting 4, 5, and 6-year-olds back to school would remove a huge burden from our families, particularly because those are the students who need the most direct help from the parent while they're trying to do their remote learning.
Yes, sir.
So then, of course, then the question comes, well, what about those 9, 10, and 11-year-olds? Why would we be looking at moving a portion of the elementary school back instead of just the entire elementary school back?
Well, the first thing would be, if we prioritize bringing those youngest students back, in some cases, we're going to take up and use those vacant rooms, and we're going to use some resources.
Okay.
We reasonably know we can do that mathematically. Now we've got to go lay it out everywhere. When you get beyond that, the class sizes, and when I say large, they're not that, they're 23 and 24, but they won't fit 6 feet apart in a room and give the teacher 6 feet. We run into the problem of keeping them socially distanced from the teacher when we go above the first grade. So we'll look to go above the first grade as far as we could reasonably go before we exhaust our ability to do it. I also have to remember we have to get these students into the building and out of the building in a way that maintains distancing, doesn't expose them more than 15 minutes to somebody else. So, and I think, you all have seen or you have heard people relate how that looks now. Dismissal and arrival is much different. Well, they're handling it fine with half of them. When we start to add people back to that, then we have to gauge how well can they handle that and maintain the protocols. Because one thing that comes across very clearly, it's come across in parent focus groups when we've talked with them. It came across strongly within our teacher forum when we talked with them. We feel comfortable moving forward with face-to-face as long as the protocols you have are in place. And that becomes the challenge. As long as we have to maintain that 6 feet until we reach a level that public health authorities say that's not necessary, or there's this other way you can mitigate it, then I think it hampers our ability to go beyond where we're talking right now. But first, we got to see, can we do this and can we do it in a way that maintains everybody's safety and health?
Well, and I think I think we celebrate what happened in the last few weeks, that people were able to meet the protocols, both staff, students, and parents. And so the expectation that we could kind of use this as a phased-in approach as a next step towards moving those other grades in sounds encouraging to me. I guess I guess the question I wonder about is, while we're talking about a phased-in approach, there are members of the General Assembly who are talking about a resolution to send us all back to school 5 days a week, period. Looking at our buildings, could we maintain 6 feet social distancing and the other protocols that we have in place that our staff have appreciated as safety measures, and have all of our kids in all of our schools 5 days a week?
No, sir.
Is that all, Mr. Lewis?
No, I have one more question, just about the special ed services. So you mentioned that one of the groups that you would intend to see back more quickly to 5 days a week are students involved in our special ed programs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean students with IEPs, or do you mean students who are in
specifically initially self-contained?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Sailors.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Oyster, Mr. Lewis, and Mrs. Wells asked a number of my questions, but there's one thing I'd like for you to follow up on, just for those that are not familiar with the numbers other than what you've shared. A typical kindergarten, first grade classroom is how many square feet?
Typical kindergarten's 1,100. In our district, a typical first grade classroom would be anywhere from 810 to 850 square feet, probably more at 850 than are at 810.
Okay, and
we have a few that are less than that in our oldest facilities. We've got some 750s in a handful of schools, although, as you all know, all of our schools were either recently built or they were renovated during BEST. But in a renovation, one thing you can't do is make the rooms, for the most part, you can't make rooms bigger. So some of our very oldest buildings that are renovated, they've got some 750 square foot rooms.
So my point being is, because of the differentials in physical space in those classrooms, you're not able to concretely say that we're going to be able to X until the staff goes, as you mentioned earlier, into every one of those classes that have been identified and physically draw out a map that fits for a class with X number of students.
Right, and I know you asked that question, and you already know this answer that I'm going to give because of the background of what you do, but everybody doesn't necessarily realize that, particularly those that might be watching or listening to this. When we say a classroom is 1,100 square feet or 850 square feet, they're not all arranged the same way. And although the room is that big, those rooms, particularly all the elementary rooms, but really rooms at any level, they have casework, i.e. they have built-ins that take away from that floor space. They also have, at the lowest grade levels, they have restrooms that inside the room, restrooms that take away from that space. Not only do you have the restroom there, you have the door swing out from it. You have the door swing into the hall, into the room, and all the pre-K and kindergarten classrooms have a second door to go straight outside, so you have to keep that area clear. Hence, having to go through and physically look at every room. So we make sure that we're not just saying because it's 850 square feet, 16 people will fit in there with 6 feet around them.
It is. Well, you answered my next question, so I'll just say this, that the situations that we face, just answering those questions, are definitely not one size fits all.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Another question that I have real quickly is, we've all received emails, phone calls, messages from members of the community sharing their concerns. And I think for the most part, we have all worked very diligently to answer those, either a call or an email. When all of this first started, you established for the lack of a better phrase, a hotline, mm-hmm. where parents and community leaders, teachers could all call in, email, and share their concerns, their questions or comments, their ideas, whatever it may be. Can you share with us how many calls and emails we received during a given period of time?
I've got a few numbers on that. We don't have it necessarily broken out just by the people that we had engaged with answering COVID-specific questions.
Right.
Because in most cases they might have come through the service center. But our service center, which is the primary number most people would call at 355-3100 number. We've received 43,183 calls since school started. Now, same period last year, 35,842.
Okay.
So I think you could reasonably attribute the uptick to the different environment. Our ombudsman's office handled 1,600 issues or incidents. Academics responded to about 1,000. And none of these are duplicated numbers. In our office, 1,750. Info line email, 1,790. Our virtual email, which is a separate setup, 8,855. And 1,084 Facebook Messenger responses. Now, we don't have them broken down by category, but what I can say to you is if you send us a question, we answer the question. So there are not any unanswered questions out there. If someone has written us solely with a comment, they get a response. Now, we have some people that frequently comment and say the same comment. They might not have gotten an individual response to each one of those, but they've gotten a response. Help desk, which is our ETS response. In a huge technologically rich environment, they have closed 12,000 help desk calls, and they have 2,400 open, and they'll close out a significant number of those today. We watch those. What we watch inside that would be repetitious, i.e. we know we have an issue with e-learning. We're working on that. We know that both by our observation. We also know because a number of people have said that. So it becomes a common issue. So we look for commonality across calls or emails or whatever manner they use to communicate. And then we make sure that we really put forth a focused effort to address those things. And again, we're going to do the same thing with an individual problem. They call the ombudsman's office and they have some individual issue. They're going to follow up with it. The school's going to follow up with it. And the ombudsman's going to check back and see if it's been responded to. So those numbers are up from a normal year, but I think that's certainly to be expected because this is anything but a normal year.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sailors. Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The recommendation that we have been following are the low, medium, and high recommendations. And as you said earlier, they are recommendations from DHEC. They do not say that any of it has to be mandatory. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct. And it's a blending of the DHEC recommendations that align with the Accelerate Ed categorizations of high, medium, and low. DHEC provides a definition for those categories.
Okay. And so by us, if we approve this amendment today, then we would not be complying with DHEC's recommendation. Is that correct?
We would be complying with every recommendation that DHEC has as to the safety of employees and students. We would not be aligning our plan that we put in place for alignment with low, medium, and high. They do not designate to you a day or percent of attendance. What their recommendations deal with are the protocols that we have in place.
Okay.
Does that make sense with me? Well, I mean, that might not make sense.
As well as anything makes sense these days. You mentioned earlier that DHEC had said that we are following their guidelines that if a teacher was exposed with a student who was positive for 15 minutes or more with or without a mask, is that a recommendation or are we required for them to do that?
My take on that is that's a requirement.
So they do have,
Quarantine and the isolation, I take those to be requirements. DHEC has a statutory authority. Where Doug go? They have a phrase for that. What do you recall the particular phrase that they have for it? But it basically has to do with infectious disease and their ability to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
It's exclusion.
so
An exclusion list, I think is what they refer to it as.
So if we had more students in school and we had more positive cases in school where the teachers or whomever is exposed, then how are we looking at that? How are we going to address that?
We might shut down a classroom. We might shut down a grade level. We might shut down a school. But as yet, we have not seen that kind of exposure. And I believe, Mr. Meek, the reason we have not seen that is because of the plan and the protocols that we have in place, that we shouldn't have that level of impact. Quite honestly, our greatest impact have been exposures outside of school in predominant number. They've been exposures from outside of school.
Okay, on August the 4th, I think was when we approved the current attendance plan. This is what we presented to our employees that we were going to follow. If we approve this amendment today, are we changing the plan that teachers and employees are coming back working with us? Are we changing the rules now in midstream?
Changing the plan, I would argue we're not changing the rules, because we have the very same protocols in place in a 2 as we have in a 1. And we now have the benefit of experience, which is knowledge we did not have when we put them in place before the year started. When we met with the teacher forum Friday, those obviously the teachers of the year from every school in the district. And we asked them about their comfort in returning to face-to-face. In the preponderance of them, well in the upper 60%, were comfortable in returning to face-to-face. And we particularly asked them about 5 days a week. The caveat was maintaining all of our established protocols.
But we're not able to do that if we come back to 5 days a week.
Not able to do that at every grade level. If you all were to say to us, bring every student back 5 days a week tomorrow, we could not follow those protocols. And where we're looking at bringing students in 5 days a week, we're looking at it in alignment with following all those protocols.
Okay. And you were talking earlier about bringing back certain grades at a time.
Yes, sir.
If you were to do that, then would you be allowing the virtual students to come back early?
I would think at that point, we would likely not be able to do that, because all of our calculations would be based on the number we have present in person today.
So you're basing it upon the 66% of the students or whatever.
We're basing it really on the ones who have chosen and stuck with being in bricks and mortar.
Okay, going to transportation. Why are we 70 drivers short? I would think personally, where there's more people unemployed out there than normal. So why are we short bus drivers?
I think there's anecdotally the issue that people have been able to make more at home. That's an issue. And one of the barriers that the transportation people have shared with me within the last couple of weeks, they believe that the lack of 40 hours, ones we have that are leaving to go to other jobs, that's a reason we're losing them. So though it's very early in this process and we have no idea what the budget will look like, if we find support for that other than just anecdotally, one of the things that we've already got finance looking at is what would it cost to move bus drivers to a 40-hour week? But we're experiencing the same difficulty. I did not talk with building services prior to this meeting. I'm going to speculate they're having a similar issue. But food and nutrition services, which traditionally has not had a challenge getting a sufficient number of employees, they're, again, 50 some odd employees short.
Okay, I could ask many more questions about that, but I won't. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meek. At this time, Ms. Bush.
Yes, thank you. We've had a lot of information to take in, and there's been a tremendous amount of great questions, and the majority of my questions have been answered. I do want to ask you, Dr. Royster, I think several of my colleagues have made it clear, and you have made it clear each of the last meetings that we have had since this took place in, I believe in March, that everybody agrees. I don't think there's a board member. You've made it clear that you agree. Our teachers, our parents agree that our children should be in school. The best option for them is 5 days a week.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that even to add a little bit to what you said, if you go back and look at the very first document we issued, it has 5 days on it.
Yes.
It is the intent from the outset to be in school 5 days a week when it is safe to do so.
Exactly, when it is safe to do so. And it seems like, although there are from other office holders to whether it's the governor on down, that everybody wants to jump in there and say, but yet when the responsibility comes, it comes and it weighs not even as much specifically on our board members as it does on you and your staff. And to make those decisions, that we have to remember the end of that is to where it's safe, and it's kind of like and I just wanted to ask you, have you ever, because I've been on the board more than 20 years now, and I have been through times when we were faced with raising taxes. I've been through building programs. I've been through a consistent battle to lower class size and raise teachers' pay. We've been through a time when we were embarrassed in Greenville County of our graduation rates, and we have tackled those and done unbelievable things in all those areas where we've all had different basis on how to get there, but we've tackled those problems. Have you ever, Dr. Royster, been faced with a problem that we have been faced with that this pandemic has faced us with?
Ma'am, and my experience from starting in the classroom a number of years ago is now 41 years. I've not seen anything like this. None of our generation, whether you look at us as a generation of educators or a generation of board members, no one's seen it. I don't think anything that compares to this. And I appreciate so much what you said. I don't think it is easy to have an opinion, I think, when you are not the individuals, whether you be a trustee or an educator, who have the ethical, the moral, and the legal responsibility to ensure that we're doing the right thing for students and for employees. And we, I believe, have approached this, when I say we, I mean the administration and the board, in a methodical, planned out manner, with the ultimate goal of doing what is best for students, and that is them being present in school every day that they can possibly be there. but also what is best to protect the safety, the health of our employees and our students and our community. And I don't think there is anyone among us, whether that be a teacher in front of a classroom right now, a principal in a building, one of us at the district level, one of you as a board member, or anybody carrying out any job in the district that is not concerned, that is not worried, that is not challenged by the environment. But what without exception has happened is people have risen to that challenge. And they have done, I believe, the absolute best that they can do given the set of circumstances that we have all been handed. Circumstances not of our choosing nor of our making. But I believe we've responded in a way that reflects the ultimate in stewardship of that which has been entrusted to us. So thank you for saying that, Ms. Bush.
Well, because I have a lot more I could say. I mean, because in light of all the challenges that we face in a normal school year, with making sure that every student's need is met, with the curriculum challenges, with all of the things that face us on just a every year opening up school year basis, you have not only faced those challenges, and I speak of not just you, but your administration, down to the teacher in the classroom that is out there trying to teach in two different ways that we're asking of them, and also the principals that are opening their buildings every day, trying to make sure the ones that are there are safe, while yet forward thinking and going and actually measuring every single classroom. You know, it's kind of like when we look at a real calm lake and we see that duck going across the water, and you don't realize that all of those, it's easy to have an opinion about what should be done, but to be thoughtful and thorough and to ensure the safety of 77,000 children and over 10,000 employees. And what we have done, and that's not just with the help of that teacher in the classroom, the bus drivers, all the staff, is that the community, when you look at the numbers that you just had up, in just 1 month from September the 1st, we went from 20% to 9%. So our community has stepped up. Our teachers and our students that have been attending school now for a few weeks, as you said, have diligently followed the protocols that we have asked of them, not only to keep themselves safe, but to keep those others that are around them safe. And you know, I can't thank all the people enough for all the work and all the effort that they continue to put into this, that gets us to where we are going, which is back to that 5-day a week. And the fact that the glass is half empty or half full, we have not had to take a step backwards because of the thoughtfulness and the thoroughness with which you have addressed these issues, just like coming back to us today. Every time we have had a meeting, I have said, I have no doubt we will continue to move forward. And we did. We opened up school, then we opened up to 1 day, we opened up to 2 days. And now here we sit talking about getting those most vulnerable ages back in on a 5-day a week. And so we continue to make progress, and we haven't had to shut down. You know, I can't think of anything more devastating to any child, but especially to our younger children, than to go back into school and then all of a sudden have their class shut down. All of a sudden have to be home for not just 2 days a week or 3 days a week, but have to be home for, here we go, we're back to being at home again 5 days a week, not seeing that teacher at all in person. And it's the thoughtful steps that we have taken, and thorough steps, to be able to get to that point to where we continue, not as fast as some may hope, because it breaks my heart when I read the emails of the challenges that our parents and our community have, and that they are facing with on an individual basis, but to be able to know that we are continuing to move forward, that we are. And the one question that I did have that I think needs to be addressed before the meeting is over is on the 10 days. Now, first, I want to make sure, is this all that you need to be able to continue? I know that a couple of people have asked those questions, but to be able to continue. So I've heard that if there's any adaptions or any way that you can feel like to move faster, like our technical schools, those type things, this will give you that perimeter to be able to move on, right?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. I appreciate you asking that, and I sense great support among the board for that. But all the things that we described to you today, other than the action we specifically ask you to take, we can take within the plan that's already approved. And not only does it fit within that plan, we have to get approval from State Department of Education for our reopening plan, and we have a every 2-week review of that. And there is nothing in our discussion. We actually had that review yesterday afternoon, and there was nothing that caused concern with that review with us continuing to move forward.
Right.
That might be helpful for you to have that news as well. And thank you so much for the comments that you made.
And on the 10 days, now I know that we said within our plan that we are going to make sure that parents have a 10-day a time to adapt and take care of having daycare, or hopefully as we move in a direction not having to have daycare. So in that 10 days, I mean, you said we would expect to hear from you within the next 10 days. Then would that be another 10 days, or could we expect in the most glorious fashion that we could hear from you sooner, and then that would still give the parents 10 days? Are we still holding to parent notification being 10 days?
I'll phrase it a little differently. I believe what we say in our plan and what we said publicly, we'd like to give you 2 weeks notice, right, to give you 10 days. We would commit to 5 calendar days. But if there were dramatic changes, now this was more envisioned that there was some dramatic negative change.
Yes.
That we might do it with less than 5 days notice. So what we would try to do with this would be to stick with the 5 calendar days. Now, most of that, again, was designed with the idea that we might have to move in a more restrictive way because of an outbreak, right. Which to me, it's more difficult for someone to make arrangements to go backwards than to go forward. Exactly. Other than perhaps some isolated incidents with transportation, i.e. you're providing your own, I would think parents would not require a significant amount of notice to say, hey, next week we're gonna go to 5. But I think probably the way we're gonna do that, other than with those career and technical group 2 students, we're probably gonna have a day or 2 of practice, so to speak. So that might be on a Friday. So they might know on a Monday, hey, this Friday we're gonna bring you in a small group. But again, that's not an overall change to the plan. That's just a change to groups within the plan. So we would do that in the way that is most expedient. And if a parent had some difficulty with that, we would certainly work with that individual parent when we're moving in a direction where we're bringing them in or desire to bring them in more often rather than less often.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Ms. Grayson, you'd like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate us trying to get back to 5 days as soon as possible and going beyond merely considering the DHEC guidelines. My questions are, when we go back to 5-day, especially at the lower grade levels, and these plans I understand are probably being made while we speak, but kindergarten classrooms, traditionally the kids are on a mat on the floor playing with numbers and letters. Are the configurations that we're looking at, do they have children in desks, or are we looking at maybe circles on the floor or dots, or what are we considering for a kindergarten classroom to look like once we go back 5 days?
That is what we have tasked initially those 9 principals with doing, and then we'll expand it to the larger group. However, what you describe, while that's the best practice, it may not be practical in maintaining the 6 feet. We believe that getting students in place 5 days a week is far more important than the consideration of the configuration of the room, although we will take that into account.
So are the 4 and 5 year olds going to need to be 6 feet apart?
Yes.
Okay. But not necessarily at a table or desk?
Not necessarily, but they need to be configured in the way that most facilitates the majority of work that the teacher will have them doing.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you send us a list of those pilot elementary schools?
Certainly.
Okay. And what's the timeline on their getting back to facilities with their considerations?
They don't have a timeline with facilities. I have a timeline with them that they're coming back to meet with us, that is senior leadership, tomorrow. That's their first report back.
Okay.
And when they come back tomorrow, based on what they say, then we'll establish deadlines going forward from that. Because at some point we have to move from the 9 to the 51. The purpose of the 9 isn't necessarily simply to bring some students in and try this out. It's for them to establish what this can look like, how many different options there are, then for them to share that with the entire group, again, of total of 51 elementary principals. Then they have to each develop their own plan that aligns with the configuration of their building and the resources that they have within it. So one of the reasons we selected certain principals had to do with their facility being representative of not just their school, but multiple school locations.
Okay. Well, I think that's great news. I look forward to hearing from them. I believe that I heard you say that if this board voted today to go back 5 days a week, the protocols could not be followed. Is that right?
They absolutely could not.
And the teachers, to Mr. Meek's point, the teachers who said that they would be willing to teach in the classroom at the beginning of the year did so under the assumption that the protocols would be in place.
Yes, ma'am. I believe if I heard the whole thing, there was a little interruption there, but if I heard correctly, our employees returned under the assumption that those protocols were in place, and I would agree with that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My understanding is that there's a joint resolution in the House Education Committee that would mandate every school in every district in the state to go back 5 days a week.
My understanding, I have not read the resolution in its entirety. My understanding is it would require the option to be available to parents. Now, it does not define what option that would be, how many options there would be, how many parents that would apply to. For example, we are aware of there are districts in this state that have done a 5-day in person, but they have capped how many parents can do that based on their ability to socially distance within that model. So it would be purely speculative at this point for me to speak to that. I know that Mr. Webb, our general counsel, is reviewing that document. I don't think he's had opportunity to fully review it, but he's reviewing it. If it is a joint resolution, I believe if it goes through that entire process, it could have the effect of law, but I would suspect that it's not quite at that point yet. As you indicated, it's been referred to a committee for their consideration at this point, a House committee, if I recall correctly.
Yes, it's in the House Education Committee. So it is, I have read it, and it is phrased as a joint resolution. And if it passes out of committee and passes both chambers of the Congress, of the legislature, it would have the force of law. So my question is, and you may not be able to answer this fully, but I think it's worth this board considering. What impact would that have on our district employees?
I would first say to you that it would depend on the interpretation of the specific language in the resolution. Does that mean that your district has to have one first grade 5-day option, one second grade, one third grade? Or does it mean literally that every parent in the district has to have the option of having their child attend 5 days in person? Those two interpretations would have very different impacts on our district and other districts. So I think at this point, other than to say to you, if that interpretation is every parent must have the option of sending their child to school 5 days a week, I do not see any way that logistically we can do that in our district and maintain the safety and health protocols that we have in place to protect students and employees.
Okay.
Any other questions, Ms. Grayson?
Just one. If teachers have concerns, can they contact their representative in the teacher forum?
Their teacher forum representative is the teacher of the year. They can share their thinking with them. One of the roles of being a teacher of the year is to be an active participant in teacher forum, and that is the group that we go to solicit the opinions, the ideas, and to obtain reaction from in areas that we're considering, whether that be instructional, administrative, whatever else. They become the voice of teachers, very much like we use the Inter-High Council to be the voice for students in the district.
And I think that's a very valuable resource for teachers to let the administration know their frustrations, their concerns, and actually get them addressed by the administration. How many times have you met with teacher forum since March? Just ballpark figure.
4. I believe 4. Just
okay.
Might have been more than 4.
And the last time was last Friday.
Yes, Friday. Mm-hmm.
Continue to meet with the teacher forum throughout this until we're back 5 days a week, face to face.
Yes, I normally meet with the teacher forum. They meet once a month. There's a leadership group within it. They meet once a month. The entire forum meets 2 times a year. But
okay.
when I've been meeting with them, I've invited the entire forum for at least 3 of those 4, and they meet by Zoom, so they don't have to come in to meet.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Grayson. Ms. Morrison, Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think quite a few of my questions have been answered. I'll start with the last one. I appreciate Mrs. Grayson's question because I had a question about what we're voting on. We're voting on changing the plans, but not the rule, not changing the protocol. I appreciate the administration saying over and over that safety is first, and we want to make sure that our employees are safe. I appreciate that almost every question that has been asked, the administration has said, our main objective, safety first, and our employees being safe. And my question was, what would that look like? Give an example. And Ms. Grayson asked that question, and you gave that example using that first grade classroom. If they all came back, they still would have to be distance, and that may mean whatever was safe, whether it be on a mat or in a desk, but that was safety first. So I appreciate that. Also, someone asked a question about if we brought everyone back with the virtual students be included, did you not say that you would not have that group, but we would use the group that we're using face-to-face? with bringing people.
Yes, ma'am, because we're making our determination about being able to safely have them present based on the number of them today. And so I would imagine there might be some people who found out, well, you can go face to face 5 days a week. That might cause some significant number to want to come out of virtual. But again, we said to virtual parents, you're committing for the year, absent the space available considerations at the semester. And right now, we have to calculate it based on who's there, and to just wholesale allow people back in would, depending on the number, if it were more than probably 1 or 2 per class, and in some cases there won't be room for 1. It would really put a barrier up to us getting back to 5 days a week, and we don't need another barrier to that.
Absolutely, I agree. One last question. You said something about our administration or each district meets and has a 2-week review. That's every district across the state of South Carolina has a 2-week review with their plan.
Yes, ma'am, that's my understanding. Dr. Turner, not correct. Every district in the state has a 2-week review of their plan with the State Department.
Yes, ma'am. I think we were on a conference call yesterday with state department officials reviewing our plan with them and our thinking going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marston Fair. Mr. Suddeth.
One question, Dr. Royster.
Yes, sir.
Who will have to make the decision to open K through 12 for 5 days a week? And I'm looking at starting with the governor, the State Department, state superintendent, our own superintendent, the school board, teachers and parents and students. Specifically, I would just like to know who has to make that decision.
Right now,
or those people mentioned are the ones that have to make the decision.
right now, absent that resolution passing, the sole decision to open or not could only be made by either this body, by me, as we do with inclement weather. Now, I would make more short-term decisions. You would make more long-term decisions. Or, as I understand it, by virtue of the authority given to the state superintendent by the legislature for responding to the COVID-19. So none of the other people that you mentioned at this point could make that decision. The legislature can enact statutory requirements on any school district or any other political subdivision of the state, but they'd have to act as a whole body.
That answer your question, Mr. Suddeth?
No. Are you saying, Dr. Royster, the decision will be made by the state superintendent and the legislature?
Right now, the decision would be made in this room. It could be made by the state superintendent or by an act of the entire General Assembly.
Who will make that decision? Not what could. Who will make that decision?
And now we're making it. You all are making it.
We as a school board can vote today, or let's say vote in the very near future, open all our schools back K through 12 for 5 days a week.
Yes, sir. You can do that. You have the legal authority to do that.
Okay.
If you were to do that, it would obviously not be, as I know you're aware, wouldn't be in accord with the protocol set forth by the Department of Health and Environmental Control.
If we're looking at DHEC, they're going to have to say we no longer need social distancing, mask, temperature checks, or wash your hands.
Well, the biggest thing that prevents us from doing that is the parameter of having 6 feet of social distancing. And the fact that if you're inside that 6 feet, even if you're wearing a mask to somebody that's positive, you have to quarantine.
Well, as long as we have social distancing, we'll never be back to normal. So,
Yes, sir. I think that's sort of a short note to say, yes.
so we as a school board can decide we're going to do away with social distancing and return back to normal school.
You could take that action. I think there's a legal prohibition against you doing that. You then would be accepting the responsibility of having made that decision, which while there might not be a statutory requirement that you maintain 6 feet, then I believe, and it would certainly be a question for Mr. Webb to respond more fully to, and likely in executive session, you open yourself up to liability because you have acted contrary to the advice of the state agency for public health. But again, that would be something more in Mr. Webb's wheelhouse to opine.
If the state superintendent legislature makes that decision, then we're back to normal. But if they don't make that decision, then we can make that decision.
Yes, sir.
But if we make that decision, then we're subject to having broken some law.
But you're subject to having broken a law, but you're subject to the liability of not having followed the public health advice. So you create you could potentially create a liability for the district by doing so, in addition to what concern I know that you would have for the safety of our employees and our students.
So when it is safe to do so, it has to say when it is safe to do so.
Well, certainly we would say that it's safe to do so when we reach a point where we're aligned with what DHEC says is safe to do. Right now, we're aligned with what they're safe to do. We believe we can bring back pre-K, K, and 1, and these other groups we've talked about, like self-contained special ed and career and technical level 2. We believe we can bring those back and still be fully aligned with what DHEC says is a responsible way to handle this and meets their protocols.
And do you think we might be able to return to normal? By that I'm saying by the end of the first semester or this school year, we won't go back.
I think it's pure.
For an opinion from you, Dr.
You know, and it's purely speculative. It's got to get down to a very low level. And we know what the low is defined by DHEC. We'd have to go to a very low level. Or DHEC have to somehow change their stance, change their criteria for what's safe. Maybe they'll learn something that will cause them to change that. Or there's a vaccine developed. Not that you would have to take it, but once there's a vaccine that's proven to be effective, then that becomes totally your choice whether you took it or not. Then the decision is solely in your hand as to whether you chose to do that or not. So any of those things, you know, and I've said that before, and I think people keyed on, I said something about a vaccine. Well, we don't require people to get vaccines. That becomes your choice unless the state compels you to do it, state government. But those would be the scenarios. It's low where DHEC has dropped that requirement, or the public health authorities have determined that requirement is no longer appropriate, or there's a vaccine, at which point that's become your choice whether you take it or not.
Who are you looking to help us make this decision?
We look directly at the guidance from DHEC because they are the state agency established for that purpose to protect public health and safety. We also get advice and input from the local health providers, primarily Prisma and Bon Secours St. Francis. And we also, on occasion, have gotten input and advice and asked questions of Medical University of South Carolina.
You were looking to DHEC.
Primarily because they are the established state agency for public health.
And then once you're satisfied with DHEC, you'll bring it back before the board.
If there were some change, some substantive change in what they provide or require or recommend, then certainly we would bring that back to you, immediately let you know of that.
you think that would, excuse me, happen before the end of this semester?
Some days I would say to you that some of those things seem likely to happen sooner, and some days I'd say to you they seem likely not to happen very soon at all. It kind of depends on what the news is of that day. Some days they seem to be making tremendous progress on a vaccine, other days not. Some days there seems to be tremendous progress in people, and I think Ms. Bush made that point. People in our community have been very cooperative in doing the things that have been asked of them to reduce the spread. Then other days you read of other places where that's not happened. And you see in our neighboring state of Georgia, school systems that opened and closed within a week because they didn't follow the recommended protocols for health and safety.
What do we know by looking at that chart that you put up about number of that has the coronavirus that's in our school system? How do we know that?
We have reports from the families of those students, and we have the DHEC reports because the medical providers are required to report that to them. So we get information from more than one source, and we include any that would be reported in our reporting, but we do not make decisions outside of that officially reported. But we want to know, even if a student was a virtual student, we would want to know if they tested positive. Because you may recall, you can be a virtual student and participate in some activities, or you could be a virtual student and come in, for example, to a career and technical course.
Am I correct when did you say that those in virtual school could not come back to our schools until the end of the school year?
When they signed up for virtual, they agreed to commit to virtual for a year, with the caveat they could apply at the semester, and if space were available, we would allow them to return if space were available.
So if at the end of the first semester, it was decided or determined that we're going to open schools back up, those people that are in that program, they could not come back. I'm talking about the end of first semester.
In the first semester, if every school, in other words, if there were no restrictions,
right,
the only way we could allow that to happen was to transfer an equal number of teachers from that program over to the regular schools. Otherwise, we could end up with 40 students in a class. So I wouldn't say there's no way that could happen, but I'd say the path to that would be very difficult.
When we get these letters from parents and some of our board members respond and answer, so the parents are asking the same thing, what we get. They want to go back to school 5 days a week.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chairman, who needs to respond to those parents? Can the school board respond to it, or does the chairman of the school board, or does all school board members?
So it's all of the above. You can respond, and I do respond to a lot of them, or you can ask Ms. Fitzer to have someone in that is professional and knows that area of expertise to respond on behalf of the district. Okay?
But I can respond and give my opinion.
Yes, sir.
My other school members have responded and given their opinion.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
As a further point, there was if the email or letter was also addressed to the administration, they will receive a response from the administration. Whether you respond or not, the administration will respond.
I've seen those.
Okay.
Thank you. And we have one last board member who'd like to ask a question, Dr. Cristobal O'Connor, and then we will vote on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to say that Ms. Bush covered my thinking very well. I've spoken to her many times about her absolute desire to push toward as much safe attendance as we could possibly achieve, as with my other colleagues, but she communicated well the concerns for the entire district and communities. And so I just align myself with her remarks and say, you are bringing to us exactly what we hoped you would bring, which is the most return that we can see and still follow the guidelines. As you are looking at the early elementary, you are also following the board priorities of early reading importance, as well as we're seeing the advantages of the decisions we made to lower class sizes to allow for this to happen successfully. But I would just ask you, if it comes to a point of whether we can bring back second grade, and given the importance of that early reading goal, could you please have someone on your staff look into the possibilities of how we can use outdoor learning to help with making that possible if needed? I know that there are other schools who have created outdoor learning opportunities. Denmark has, Denmark has, of course, had outdoor learning with or without a pandemic very successfully, and do not enjoy nearly the mild weather that we do. So I just feel like if we can consider tents or the extreme good fortune of the surroundings that we have on our school grounds to try to make it possible to squeeze that second grade back in safely, I just think it would be worth asking someone to look at that seriously. So thank you for bringing this today and for the work you're doing to bring back as many elementary students as possible, as quickly as possible, as we expect for health changes to be even more complex as we face fall and winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bala-Connor. And we have one last, Ms. Goodwin Caldwell has a question. Ms. Goodwin Caldwell? Hello?
I don't see her on the list up there.
I see.
She on the phone?
I see her name, but don't see her picture.
Ms. Fitzer, is she on her phone or? What is her question?
I am. I'm on here now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I couldn't get back to it. Yes, I am on my phone. But Crystal just said what I had wanted to ask about outside classrooms. Have we ever considered those? Dr. Royster.
Yes, ma'am. We have some places that lend themselves to that. They already have a covered area adjacent to the building. There are obviously some issues with going outside, that you have weather impacts, unless it can be immediately adjoining the building. It's something we would encourage schools to use. But as far as that, using that to increase the capacity of bringing students in, I don't think it's a viable solution to increase our capacity, but it's certainly a strategy that they might use.
Okay, thank you. That's all that I needed.
Thank you. With that being said, I'd like to thank all of our Board of Trustees for being here for the vote. We have the motion on the floor to amend the attendance plan framework to allow the administration flexibility to utilize attendance plan 0, 1, or 2 with DHEC designation of high. And at this time, all in favor, please address by saying aye.
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 All opposed? The motion carries. And at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Any questions? With that being said, all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The meeting has